Something powerful happens when you realize you weren't created to simply do good things, but God wants to use you to do God things, great things. Hey Beacon, welcome back for another episode of the Bounce Back Blueprint Community Podcast. I'm your Bounce Back Guide, Tiffany Huff-Struthers, and you know I am so happy that you are here in the place to be with me. I do not take it lightly. I am excited to start off this week's episode sharing one of our most recent reviews. And I just want to say thank you if you've left a review, if you've left a rating, if you've shared the podcast on social media or with your girlfriends or your friends via text. It really does make a difference in our ability to reach other beacons and make a greater impact, and for God to get the glory. So this week's review comes from Alexia N. Smith, and it says, gifted storytelling and teaching. Tiffany is a gifted storyteller, which makes sense because this podcast really has supported me in telling my own story. Week after week, she gently and lovingly gives you the tools to build the confidence you need to share yourself with the world and help others. When she greets you with the "Hey Beacon," it really makes you feel as if you can take on the world. Definitely a podcast I keep in my back pocket always. Thank you so much, Alexia, for taking the time to leave the review and for sharing such encouraging words. I really appreciate it. Glad to know that my Hey Beacon greeting is making a difference. I'm very intentional in greeting you all that way. So I'm excited today because today is my birthday episode. I turned 40 this past Sunday. Yes, I'm still getting used to letting 40 and the fact that I am 40 roll off my tongue. I am beyond grateful to have reached this milestone and even more grateful and excited about what is to come, all that God has called me to be, to do, to have, and how He is using me and will continue to use me to help beacons like you bounce back, but more importantly, to build His kingdom. So today's episode title is Unshakeable Joy, and I want to share today about what I've learned over the past year on the pathway to 40, on the road to 40, right? And it starts with God having revealed to me, I should say, that my word for 2020 was going to be unshakable. Now, I've been having a theme word or scripture for the last 6 or 7 years. And initially, I should say, not generally. Initially, these words were being revealed to me closer towards the end of the calendar year. But over the last 4 or so years, I've noticed that God has begun to reveal to me my word of the year closer to my birthday, which is in June. So I am getting the divine download for my theme for the year at the start of my birth new year as opposed to at the start of the calendar new year. And while I recognized the shift and that I was getting the revelation earlier, I wasn't fully embracing the responsibility of said revelation earlier. And also, only in the past year or so have I really begun to discern how the word takes root, not at the top of the calendar year, but more closer to when I celebrate my birthday. So last year, I would say maybe around July, God revealed to me that my word for 2020 was going to be unshakable. And it was very clear to me as to why He had given me that word. If you didn't listen to episode 10, I do believe it is, put your head down, then I recommend that you go back and listen to that because it will give you some insight. But um, I was very distracted. And so around the summer last year, I started studying the book of Nehemiah. I was led to start studying the book of Nehemiah. And of course, I don't have the time or capacity to read the entirety of the book of Nehemiah to you, but I do highly recommend that you read it. But what I can say is that Nehemiah was a sort of bounce back guide for his people, right? He was working as a cupbearer. He felt highly compelled and sorrowful for the way that his home, where he was from, how it had been debilitated and torn down. And so he went back to rebuild the wall, right? And this is obviously the Tiff's Notes version of the story. Again, I do encourage you to go and read it for yourself. However, as I was studying the book of Nehemiah and God began to speak to me about my word being unshakable, I was led to a verse in Nehemiah 6, and specifically Nehemiah 6, verse 3. Now, the Tiff's Notes version of this scripture is, I don't have time to be bothered with y'all. I'm doing what God has called me to do. And if I come down there and be bothered with what all the nonsense y'all got going on, then the work is going to stop, right? And so that is my interpretation, right? But the literal scripture in NIV says, and what was happening was the leaders were upset because Nehemiah and the people were rebuilding the wall. So they were trying to distract him. They were trying to get his attention away from the work God had called him to so that they could undermine, dismantle, um, you know, do away with the great things that he was called by God to do. And so in Nehemiah 6:3, it says, So I sent messengers to them with this reply: I am carrying on a great work and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you? And so when God revealed this to me, I really did embrace it because I recognized that I was very distracted. There were people who were coming to me and for me in this season to, and not, I won't say that everybody was necessarily looking to undermine me, but here's what I will say. When we aren't using discernment and wisdom, when we aren't seeking first the kingdom, right, before we make decisions, before we make commitments, before we give a yes, then even things that appear to be opportunities become obstacles. And so God was showing me that I needed to get to the place where Nehemiah was, in that he recognized that what he was doing was so important, so great, so necessary, that he didn't even have time to say, I'm not coming. He sent messengers, right? He had someone else go and say, let them know that what I have to do is so important that I don't have time to even address them directly. They need to go on. And so um, it has been quite the journey, right? And because sometimes I can be hard headed, full transparency. This is a judgment free zone, though, right? Because sometimes I can be hard headed, God had to reinforce this for me. Like I said in episode 10, put your head down. He had to literally tell me to put my head down, right? Nehemiah already had his head down. He was doing the great work. He was leading others to do the great work, and he was focused. And because he was focused and he knew that the opposition was coming, he had already positioned people, right? He already had messengers in place so that they could go and take the message to who needed to hear it while he continued to lead the people to do the work. And that's a word for you right there before we even really get into what I have to share, that you need to be mindful of the company you keep, right? You need to know the positions the people and what positions you need to have around you so that you are able to stay focused with your head down and do the great work that God has called you to, so that you can be unshakable, right? So that those distractions do not become so distracting that you are delaying your destiny, that you are delaying what God will have you bring forth in this season. And so, as God continued to speak to me about the word unshakable, um, as he often does with me, he revealed that there are levels to this. And I thank God for his grace and the way that he reveals things to me and breaks them down so clearly, because again, I can be hard headed. I can misinterpret. And so he gives me the grace to get these divine downloads where he really breaks things down to me. And so I want to break things down to you the way he did for me. The three levels that he revealed to me where I needed to really buckle down and become unshakable, and how I was challenged in doing so. So, first and foremost, um, it became very clear that I needed to be in position to give God my unshakable yes. Right? That meant that no matter what he called me to do, no matter where he told me to go, no matter who he told me to serve or how he told me to serve or when, it was an immediate yes. And the reason is because God, right? It was not a why, it was not a what if, it was not a could we consider. There was to be no delay in my response, right? As I always say, delayed obedience is still disobedience. And delayed obedience is a distraction. It undermines your work, it undermines your calling, it undermines the glory that God is to get from your life. And this was a challenge for me specifically because I had to learn the importance of being in alignment over achievement, right? Alignment over achievement. That is what I had to embrace in order to get to this unshakable yes. And here's why. I grew up chasing achievement. I was the youngest of three children, and my family was ravaged with every epidemic in the Black community. My parents got divorced. My father was on drugs. My mom had some mental health challenges. My brother was in a gang, in and out of jail. My sister, a teenage mom, who dropped out of high school at the top of her class. And then there was me, right? And so I was supposed to be the one unscathed. And that manifested itself in me um, earning attention through my achievements, right? If I wanted someone to pay attention to me with everything else that was going on, with everything else I was growing up and growing through in the midst of, I had to get these achievements, right? And so my life became a consistent race to the next achievement, whether it was an A on a test, whether it was graduating from middle school, graduating from high school, graduating from college, right? Everything in my life was based on achievement. But what I know for sure, and what I am praying you will embrace through this episode and really consider, is that when you are living a spirit led life, when you surrender and commit to unbecoming who you thought you were so that you could become who God has said and called and created you to be, then the way that you pursue is different, right? In everyday life, we are chasing achievement. If we have a traditional job, we work for 2 weeks, and the achievement is that we get a paycheck at the end of that 2 weeks, right? When we're in pursuit of an education, we know that it takes 4 years traditionally. You do your work, you go to class for 4 years, you get that piece of paper. When you are doing the work of God, when He has called you to something, there are seasons, and oftentimes very long seasons, where being in alignment is the achievement. The challenge, though, is that there is no trophy necessarily for alignment. There is no specific mile marker at which you get recognition for being in alignment, right? The desire of your heart has to be for God to get the glory. And that is what keeps you That is what allows you to prioritize, I should say, alignment over achievement. And this was challenging for me, even up until, this last year. If I'm very honest, it has been a challenge for me because I am working, I am being diligent, right? I am focused, one foot in front of the other. But a lot of the work isn't being seen. Just like Nehemiah, the wall came up very rapidly, but there was some work that was being done that wasn't necessarily being seen on the front end, right? There was no one who saw the process that it took for his messengers to get into position for them to be able to send them. There was no one who saw what Nehemiah had to do as it relates to getting permission from the king, and how he had to travel by night, and how nobody knew what God had sent him to do. And he was observing before he put his plan into action. All of those things, while they led to a public achievement, right, of the wall being built, those things were work that had to be done before in the dark when no one could see. And how I want to encourage you um, with this is by this truth. I remember when I got pregnant with my first son, I worked at the Social Security Administration, and there were a lot of older people there who had been there for a very long time. And there was an older black gentleman um, who I would speak to often. And when I announced that I was pregnant, right, and as soon as I told that I was pregnant, it was like I started getting really big. And he came over to me one day in the break room, and he said, "You know what, Tiff? Everything you do in the dark comes to light." And the same is true on this bounce back journey, right? A lot of times we look at that um, as a negative, right? When you do something bad, people will find out. The same is true, though, when you are in alignment. What you are doing in the dark is going to come to light. When you are giving God your unshakable yes, day after day, and week after week, and month after month, and oftentimes year after year, and you feel like no one can see it and no one knows what you're doing, and you're not necessarily achieving anything, know that being in alignment, doing what is necessary in the dark, is going to come to light, right? And that's where I had to get to. I had to recognize that laying the groundwork is so necessary, right? Building a solid foundation is so necessary. Getting to a place where I can do the work diligently and have people in position to speak to my distractions so that I don't have to stop. Having people on my team who can work with me and collaborate with me and serve with me so that the mission and vision that God has given me to manifest comes to light as He intended to, is an achievement. Though not measurable in the same way that the world measures or marks achievement, it's not any less important. And so being able to recognize the power of alignment over achievement was necessary first for me to get to that unshakable yes. And then I had to get to the place where I embraced unshakable vision. And the reason why getting to alignment over achievement was necessary first is because in order to get to an unshakable vision, I had to embrace clarity over control. Now, I'm sure you know that when we have a journey and when we set a goal and when we are chasing achievement, right? That trophy, that piece of paper, that paycheck, whatever it may be, we have a tendency to desire control, right? We want that journey to set achievement, trophy, paycheck, piece of paper to go a certain way, right? I can tell you for myself, I considered, controlling the journey to obtaining my bachelor's degree by taking summer classes here and front loading my course schedules the at the beginning so that I could finish in 3 years. And for what? What was the rush, right? But when we get in position, like I said, when we're seeking God first, we have that clarity. And then all things are added to us. So we can release ourselves from control if we are willing to embrace the need for clarity, which is why clarity and faith and focus being the foundation is cornerstone number one of the bounce back blueprint. Because when you have clarity, you can make peace with the process, right? You can make peace with growing through. You can make peace with the reality that even though the seed you are planting may not be yielding a harvest yet, you know that the work is being done under the soil. And so I had to get really clear about the bigness of what God has called me to, and that it would take some time. And I also had to get clear about the work that I needed to do within myself so that I was prepared to handle the tasks that were to come in order to manifest the vision, right? So embracing the vision has to do with one, recognizing your position, right? And God's position. Because when we try to maintain control, then we step into God's position. And God don't need our help, number one. And number two, if we are assuming God's position, then no one is assuming ours. And it becomes more and more, we become more and more susceptible to distractions, to deterrence, and to delaying our destinies when we are trying to maintain the facade of control. The good news is that God got it. We don't have to be in control because he has it. We do, however, need to seek the kingdom first, because that's where the clarity comes in, right? And so as I began to have several seats, right? And really embrace that season again of having my head down and really seeking him and waiting to hear from him, and recognizing that there is truth to what many people say, start before you're ready. But you have to be mindful of not starting before you're ready to the extent that you get before God, right? God needs to go ahead of you. And so if you feel yourself getting before God, or you feel like you need to work a week and get the paycheck instead of the full 2 weeks and get your paycheck, then you probably need to check yourself. You probably have some challenges with the need for control, right? And our need for control is usually a revelation, or yes, the revelation that we have some insecurity, right? And when we have some insecurity, it's likely because we are lacking some clarity, right? There's something that we don't understand fully. There's some part of us that we haven't fully embraced, or we are not clear about how important it is for us to trust God. And again, why we started the podcast with the trust issue series, because if you are expecting to bounce back fully, you are going to have to trust God, right? You must trust God. So, relinquishing that control was key for me, and just investing the time and the space and the energy to really get clarity on an ongoing basis, and understanding and giving myself permission to pause if I needed more time than I would have liked for clarity. That has been so integral on this climb, this journey to 40, right? Understanding that there are some things that I really need to relinquish control over. And while I've always valued clarity, and while it is something that I impart on my clients, the importance of clarity, my need for clarity was upgraded, right? It was increased significantly. And that led to level 3, right? So the final level that God revealed to me on this journey for me of being unshakable. So it was unshakable, yes, right? Unshakable vision. And then finally, unshakable focus. Unshakable focus. And this I knew right from the beginning, because again, verse 6:3 talked about how I cannot stop doing the good work, right? And he told me that I needed to put my head down and focus. But again, he reinforced this just before my 40th birthday, maybe late April, early May. I was praying one morning during my power morning and meditating. And as I was journaling, God said to me, Tiffany, you have everything you've prayed for. The reason why it doesn't look or feel the way you anticipated it would is because you aren't stewarding it well. And that was a gut punch. I was like, okay, snatch my edges. Why don't you just take the whole lock off the side? But it was truth. And so, in order to get to unshakable focus, I had to shift my perspective to understand that godly stewardship is success, right? As opposed to seeking success, I needed to seek and do the work to be a better steward. God has already given us abundance. Abundance is our birthright. But it's how we are stewarding what we have that makes all of the difference, right? And an example of this in the book of Nehemiah is when, they were made aware that the quote unquote powers that be were trying to undermine and interrupt and sabotage ultimately the work they were doing. What happened was they positioned themselves in a way that they had a tool to do the work in one hand and they had a weapon in the other, which meant that they were always on guard, right? They were always paying attention to and defending and stewarding well the work that they needed to do, but they were able to do the work simultaneously. And I hope you can hear what I'm saying, because sometimes we spend so much time and energy defending why what we are doing is valid, defending why it's important, defending or trying to convince people of the power of what we have to do. We exert so much energy there that we stop doing the actual work, right? We shift our focus completely onto defending and trying to convince people and trying to sell people. But listen, we have to get to the point where we know that we know that we know. God said it, and that's enough. And our people are our people. And in doing so, we are putting ourselves in position to be good stewards of the work, but to continue the work at the same time. And for me, being able to do that required me to go through these levels of unshakable, right? And to be clear, I believe that I will be working through these three levels through the year of 40, right? But I had to recognize that I had to choose alignment over achievement, right? I had to recognize the power of clarity over control, even to get to the point where I recognized that my stewardship is what was going to influence my success, right? Not that if I was successful, I would have more to steward. Hopefully that makes sense, because from a worldly perspective, you chase success, you have more, right? And I'm not only saying more money or more things, right? We want more time, we want more peace, all of the above, right? But it is necessary to really shift your perspective and consider how you are stewarding what you have and how said stewardship is impacting your measure of your success. And also the standard by which you are measuring your success. Is it God's way or is it the world's way, right? What does success look like for you? And I encourage and challenge you to really take some time and sit with this. Even if your birthday isn't in June, it may not be your new year, but on this bounce back journey, reflection is something that happens consistently. And also God has the final say in seasons and determination of when changes and shifts happen, right? So, as we are in this season of so many new normals, so many things, pandemics impacting us, and creating space for us to begin again, right? It is a perfect time to begin to reflect. And so before I give you my final level of unshakable, I want to encourage you to consider, where have you not been giving God your unshakable yes? Where have you been wavering? Where has achievement become priority over alignment? Where have you not been embracing God's unshakable vision for your life, right? Where have you been prioritizing control over the clarity? Where have you been seeking control over seeking first the kingdom? And then, finally, how has prioritizing success over being a good steward opened the door for you to be distracted by other people, by other things, by the need to react when God would have you respond, right? All of these are questions that I have to continuously and consistently reflect on as I am on this unshakable journey. And as I sat and reflected on the year and really the past 6 months of 2020 with all that has been going on with the pandemics and the shutdowns and just really reprioritizing, what I have come to recognize is that more than anything in this season of my life, I want unshakable joy. I want joy that comes from giving God my unshakable yes, even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it stretches me more than I would prefer to be stretched. I want unshakable joy that comes from embracing the vision, even if that means I don't get to control the journey to getting there, even when that means that the blood, sweat, and tears that I put in to embrace said vision isn't being applauded by anyone else. I want unshakable joy when I am focusing, when I have to choose purpose over what's popular, when I have to wake up even another hour earlier because of what God has called me to. I want unshakable joy in the midst of uncertainty and unrest, and when the world is panicking, and when it looks like everything is coming crumbling down. I want unshakable joy even when being an amazing steward means I need to be defending with one hand and still working with the other hand. I want unshakable joy when my son spills something on the counter or when he doesn't clean it up the way that I would want him to. I want unshakable joy when my husband misses the hamper, even though his pants are right in front of it. I want unshakable joy when I can't sleep at night and when I wake up even earlier than I intended to wake up, and I already wake up at dark 30. I want unshakable joy, period. And so that is where I am being diligent in this season of my life. And I want to challenge you to think about what unshakable joy looks like for you and how your unshakable yes, how your unshakable vision, and how your unshakable focus are necessary for you to have unshakable joy. And of course, because I love you like that, I have an opportunity to help you kickstart your journey to unshakable joy, and it is the She's Free Challenge. And the She's Free Challenge is a 4-day challenge for women just like you who want to set yourself and others free by sharing your story. So the challenge kicks off Monday, June 21st. You can register for the challenge with the link in the show notes, which is bit.ly/she's free. And that's not all. Next week on the podcast, Monday through Friday, there will be an episode for She's Free Week. And during She's Free Week, you will hear from some amazing bounce back beacons about how their decision to be bold and courageous and share their stories has allowed them to set both themselves and others free. So you don't want to miss it. That means if you're not already subscribed to the podcast, you will need to subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening. Apple, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, wherever you are listening to this episode. If you are not subscribed, sis, hit the subscribe button. And if you have not already, please leave a review. Give us a rating. Again, when you do that, it creates an opportunity for other beacons just like you to find and be blessed by this podcast. And of course, I will shout you out. Each week, I plan to shout out someone who has left a review. So please leave a review. Stay tuned. Make sure you're subscribed. She's Free Week is kicking off next week, followed by She's Free Challenge. It is going down. This is our kickoff party for Unshakable Joy. And of course, before I leave you, I am going to tell you this. God is not going to play you, but if you are allowing your destiny to be distracted by everybody else, sis, you are playing yourself. Get on this journey to unshakable joy with me.